Hello, everybody, and welcome to an early live broadcast of the Renz Show. We are excited to be here. Producer Andrea is particularly excited. She loves getting up at 5 a.m., but she's Pacific time and recording. What else could you possibly want to do at 5 a.m. other than hang out with me?
On a Friday morning, this is a dream come true, really.
Well,
every diversity hire, this is what they dream of.
This is precisely what we look for, right? We have a big show today. I'm very excited. Ken McCarthy's joined us, and Ken has written a book, What Nurses Saw. And, we don't do a ton of interviews here. We're doing more of them lately. I'm kind of having fun with it. I like talking to people.
Yeah.
But this is really, really critical, right? So for COVID and the whole COVID debacle has constituted the single greatest demonstration of crimes against humanity in human history, to my mind. When you talk about hospitals murdering people, when you talk about protocols that you know are going to result in a higher likelihood of death being implemented on a broad scale, when you talk about patients who were intentionally neglected, who were abused, who were just all these sorts of things, this is one of the most egregious things happening, and it's still going on, folks. It hasn't changed. It is absolutely still occurring. The infrastructure is all there, and they need it to be there because we've got the new disease X that the World Economic Forum is getting ready to unleash on the world. And, they need to be able to ramp up deaths and kill people. This is an unbelievable situation. It used to be that the doctor's legal and ethical obligation was to keep people safe. Now we have a situation. Go back to, was it 2021? I had the whistleblower data from Medicare, Medicaid database showed that we knew that, for example, in the state of Texas, and I like using Texas as an example because it's Texas, for God's sakes, they knew that over 90% of the people, 9 out of 10 of the people that were put on a vent for COVID were going to end up dead. The doctors knew it. The patients knew it. Everybody knew it. The patients didn't. The doctors knew it. The hospitals knew it. The insurance company, the government, everybody knew that if you got put on the vent, it was going to kill you. Yet they continued pushing it on everybody. That is absolutely unacceptable. But they wouldn't let you try ivermectin, right? You can't try ivermectin, but we're happy to push these death protocols on you. It was insane. It was insane. As we went through this period of time, I spoke to a lot of nurses and a lot of doctors and a lot of people who were trying to fight back within the system, and they were incredibly frustrated. It was a very painful thing. And, this story has to be told. It has to be, we have to get this out there in the public. We have to help people to understand that it's the hospital protocols were the main driver for the deaths from COVID. It wasn't COVID. COVID was just a cold or a flu, right? It turns into pneumonia, and normally that gets treated. But in the specific case of COVID, instead of treating it, we actually killed people. We took steps in the hospitals to murder people. It was well known, but yet instead of fighting back, instead of speaking out, these doctors largely just put their head down and kept killing people. They knew what was happening. Many of them, not all of them, but there were a lot of them that knew what was happening. And instead of looking into it, instead of doing some homework, instead of researching, why is it that all of my patients are dying from what essentially looks like pneumonia? They just kept jacking those ventilators into people, giving them poisons, and watching them die.
And there were nurses, though. So we're talking right now about nurse whistleblowers. And one of the first things I did in the fight, gosh, it was in the very, very beginning, it might have been 2020, was I interviewed whistleblower nurse Nicole Saratek. She's out in my state.
Right.
And she was one of the first ones to go viral. We've had these stories of nurses from the front lines. She went viral because she was crying into her phone, putting a video out there saying, why are we killing people? There were these nurses going, when they got the orders from the doctors of how to treat these patients, they sat there and said, excuse me, that's going to kill them. Why are we doing that? So God bless these whistleblower nurses out there like Nurse Erin and these frontline nurses. But why don't we have stories of frontline doctors? I mean, we have some, but I feel like there was more nurses. But then you have the whole floor
Yeah.
of the hospital and the higher echelons of the hospital just in lockstep doing
Yeah.
this evil protocol stuff, and these
Literally
nurses just
murdering
sitting there
people.
going, why are we murdering people?
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
part of that is because of the role of a nurse in the medical system. As the nurse
absolutely.
is supposed to be an
Yeah,
advocate for the patient,
absolutely.
and the doctor apparently only advocates for his own pocket. So,
That's true.
I mean, this is a big issue, but this is what happened, right? So, we're going to talk about more of this. I want to bring Ken on. Let me bring Ken on here. Um, uh, how we doing, Ken? I'm honored to have you here. Thank you for writing this book. Thank you for putting out there. I'm very eager for this conversation.
Thanks for having me on. And I have to ask a technical question. Our generator just kicked on. You don't hear it, do you?
No,
It's
I
not
do
bad.
Oh,
not
We
hear
can
good,
it.
hear
good.
you.
Okay, we don't have to worry. Okay. I live
I
in the
do not.
countryside, and it's essentially the third world here when it comes to electrical service. So, yeah,
Well, hey, if Biden has his way, we won't have any electricity, anyways.
there you
Um,
go.
so let's talk about this first of all, just as a way of background. Ken, tell everybody a little bit about you and how you got to this fight, right? Because you didn't. It's not like your history is as a nurse or as a doctor, but you end up in this fight. How does that all happen?
Well, it's a long story, but I'll keep it short. I've been aware of medical malfeasance for a long time. It goes back to my teenage years, and I think a lot of people. I bet if we could see our audience and ask them to raise their hands, how many people have been abused or mistreated or injured seriously or killed or know of somebody who was killed by the medical system? And I think a lot of hands would go up. And
I
we
would
had a lot of
absolutely agree.
yeah, we had a lot of experiences in my family. I had them personally, and so I always looked at the whole medical system with a jaundiced eye. I did study some science in school. I studied neuroscience. I didn't get the degree in it, but I did study it. And so I'm not intimidated by anything medical or scientific. I just, use the dictionary and figure
Yeah.
it out, which I encourage everybody to do, by the way. There's no reason that any of us can't figure anything out given enough time. And there's certainly a lot of experts around that are willing to explain things to us now, thanks to YouTube and things like that. We should take advantage of that. So my first concern was the psychiatric drugging of children, which is, to
Oh,
me, a
that's an issue.
total insane. I mean, it's just insane. And I could talk a lot about that, but I was very early and very outspoken in that with whatever platform I had. I was very concerned about the Gardasil insanity. That made no sense.
Yeah.
And we'll see when we get into the COVID thing. This stuff makes no sense, no common sense. It makes no scientific sense. And it flies in the face of what was once considered medical practice.
Yeah.
So I was always aware things were weird. When this China pantomime started, my thought was, well, let's see, it's coming out of China, and it's being reported by the U.S. news media.
Yeah.
Therefore, can I say bullshit?
Yeah, you can say bullshit.
It's bullshit squared or maybe bullshit cubed. I mean, it's
Yeah.
exponent. So I just immediately thought there's something wrong. So my antenna went out. My profession is marketing and promotion, but I'm also a student of history, and I'm particularly interested in history of propaganda. As a young man, I think I was in my teens, I saw a book called The War Hitler Won. And I thought,
Yep.
what? He lost the war. And I read it, and it was all about the history of German propaganda and the fact that they did lose the war, but they didn't lose the propaganda war at home. Even when the whole place was on fire, people were still drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yep.
And that really opened my mind as to the power of government propaganda. And I've just continued that study my entire life. So when I'm looking at COVID, I'm looking at it through the lens of an informed person on the history of propaganda.
Well, I
So
need
that's how I
to.
came to the basic battle.
Well, Ken, I gotta introduce you to Peter Bregan. I didn't know that you were tied in on the child psychiatric stuff. Dr. Peter Bregan's a good friend of mine. Him and Ginger, his wife, they've been fighting that for years. They're wonderful people. But so I want to go and I want to just to kind of set the stage here. I'm looking at the comments, and the first comment, Nick says, Nuremberg, and I'm, crimes against humanity. Work on the truth. And the question, why are so many blind to the truth? Well, I want to kind of lay a little bit of groundwork here early, because a lot of people I expect will watch this and they'll ask, what about the lawsuits? What about this? What about that? For years in this country, we've heard about, the lawyers are making medicine so expensive and we need malpractice reform and you got to get the lawyers out and you got to make sure. And so we had tons of malpractice reform. It was everywhere. Everywhere you look, states, especially the Republican states. And, I'm a patriot. I'm a conservative guy. I don't like lawyers who are ambulance chasers. I certainly don't do that. And I understand there are some bad lawyers out there that do things that are really, questionable ethics, right? But this COVID has demonstrated the dangers of keeping the lawyers out, right? Because what's happened now is they've created a situation where these doctors and these hospitals knowingly were murdering people. I talked on the air or off air with you beforehand. Back in 2021, we dropped Medicare, Medicaid whistleblower data that showed that in the state of Texas, red Texas, 9 out of 10 people in hospital systems put on a vent ended up dead. Why in the hell would you put anybody on a vent then? Give them some ivermectin, do something else. Why wouldn't you let the patient's family make a decision about what they wanted to do? They wouldn't do it. And instead they drove deaths. But you couldn't do anything. They said, well, where's the lawyers? Well, we can't sue. You've got malpractice reform. You've got COVID immunity. You've got all these different things. And so when the lawyers aren't there, there's no accountability. And you may not like the lawyers, and no one may want to see the lawyers suing them. But I'll tell you what, the reason I haven't been able to shut this down as a lawyer is because a lot of these cases we can't file. It's openly illegal for us to file some of these cases. You're given immunity on COVID issues. You're given immunity on this. You're given immunity on that. We have all this malpractice reform. And so the lawyers couldn't do anything about it. The doctors were bought off, and the nurses were told, shut up and deal with it, or you're going to lose your job. And enter your book, right? Because your book and my work, same thing, right? So, as I'm going through and as I'm fighting this, and I'm listening to these guys murdering these people's loved ones, right? They're literally, I'm getting call after call after call. Hey, they got my loved one on the vent. They say they're going to die. Why won't they let me try ivermectin? Hey, my loved one's got a bacterial pneumonia and they're saying it's COVID pneumonia. Why won't they give them an antibiotic? Well,
or vitamins. They didn't let people have vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin D, basic things. When you're on a vent, you can't eat. They starved these people. They dehydrated these people. When you're on a vent,
right?
When you're on a vent, you don't get any nutrients.
Why won't they feed my loved ones? Why won't they give them, at least some nutrients through a feeding tube or something, right? Nope, nothing. They literally starve them to death. They give them medicines to suppress their breathing. They change the palliative care protocols to actually expedite death, which is literally the definition of murder. And, nobody understood it. And then, when your loved one gets put on the vent, they immediately push you into palliative care. And people didn't understand that what that really meant is they were murdered, that you were giving them permission to murder your loved ones. And to this day, they're still pushing that. And the palliative care protocols have been changed, and they do actually expedite death in many cases. And that is truly if you are increasing the rate in which someone is going to die, that is the definition of murder, right? Yes. If I shoot you, I make you die sooner, right? That's murder. Right. If I give you a drug overdose or don't feed you or do something else that I know is intentionally going to increase your likelihood of death, that is the definition of murder.
Yeah.
Yet that is our medical system.
Yeah, it's commonly known that if you shoot someone, you increase the chances of their death, right? But we don't know yet. I know, people that have seen it know, but the public doesn't know that hospitals and doctors are doing things that are known to kill people repeatedly over and over again. And isn't that murder? I'm not an attorney, right? So I've puzzled with this. What do we call this? Negligent homicide. I don't know what the term is, but I want to go off on a little slight tangent. I just remembered something, and it relates to what you were saying. in the early 80s, I was hired by a political communications company to do research for a series of ads they wanted to do for the New Jersey Plaintiffs Association, right? And they wanted me to go to Trenton, which is the state capital, and research the actual payouts on malpractice cases.
Yeah.
Because everybody was talking about how bad it was and people were
Oh,
getting,
yeah. Yeah.
So I spent a week there with 3 guys going through all the judgments for, I think, 20 years. And I came out horrified. Man loses limb, gets $6,000.
Yep.
Woman's face disfigured for life due to the carelessness of, somebody.
Yep.
2,500. I mean, insanity. There were occasional big wins. They were very, very rare. What was common was people who really were injured horrifically that got pennies on the dollar. So this idea that there was an explosion of crazy judgments and lawsuits against doctors, it didn't pan out in the research that I did in Trenton in the early 80s. So sorry to take us off on that sidebar, but I realize it's plaintiff attorneys that keep this world honest.
Yeah.
And
but I mean, the amount of money that the doctors get, I mean, you're talking about money flow, the pennies that go down to these people in these lawsuits, but then the amount of money, like during COVID, that the doctors made, there shouldn't be a money-making machine on this whole story we're telling either.
Well, it really
protocols.
It really was a money-making machine. And as Tom points out, and this is probably the biggest takeaway, this thing is still in place.
Yeah.
We haven't put a scratch on it.
No,
right?
no. The laws are still there. The books, everything's still in the books. And there's still, if you go in for COVID today, you're still very likely to be murdered in a hospital with almost no recourse. Yep. And understand, this is so critical because not only are they still murdering you in the hospital, but they are actually they're tripling down on this and creating precedent on a large scale with Disease X coming. And I don't think we can talk about this without recognizing right now the World Economic Forum is meeting in Davos, and they're talking extensively about Disease X. Disease X, according to our intel, is sitting on a shelf right now. Okay, Disease X, according to our intel, will be released, and I don't think it'll be an accident. They're going to try and say it's a zoonotic spillover. It's not a zoonotic spillover any more than COVID was a zoonotic spillover. They're going to release Disease X. It's going to be far more dangerous. We've asked a question. I just posted on Twitter the other night and asked the question, is Disease X going to be much more dangerous for those that were vaxxed? And I think the answer is yes, but that's another story. So we're going to have this Disease X running around. You're going to have a whole bunch of people going to the hospital, and you're going to see COVID part 2. And no one is changing it. Nobody's addressing it. The lawyers can't do anything. They're going to pass more laws to make sure that the hospitals are just as insulated with Disease X. They're going to look at where we've had success in cracking things on the COVID litigation, and they're going to double down on tightening those laws. And our crooked politicians aren't going to do a damn thing about it other than facilitate it. So get ready, folks. It's going to happen again. And you aren't going to have health care except for the handful of doctors who are, out there telling the truth. And those guys are going to get attacked, thrown out of the profession. Yep. They're going to lose their license.
And get sued.
And, you're going to have nothing you can do. So we better pay attention to what happened with COVID. If you think COVID's over, if you think, oh, I'm tired of it, I want to move on, it's not an issue for this election cycle, we need to move on, I got news for you. This needs to be one of the top topics. If there's one thing that Bobby Kennedy has done great, and I actually like Bobby, I'm a Trump guy, right? But I like Bobby, and I like that he's kept the focus on these COVID murders and things like that because it's necessary. But for Bobby, nobody would be talking about this. Thankfully, Bobby's there. I mean, we have the Republicans in the House with their COVID committee who are doing nothing but trying to whitewash what's occurred and cover up for the military-industrial complex involvement in this and the whole thing. Brad Wenstrup, the head of the COVID committee, got $168,000 from Big Pharma in the last election cycle. Do you think he's going to look at this? Big Pharma, who made money off of remdesivir? Big Pharma, who made money off of all of the drug protocols that they use to murder people? Hell no, the hospitals made a killing off of this. Wenstrup's not doing anything other than covering for this, and they're going to try and throw Fauci under the bus. Now, Fauci belongs under a bus, maybe under a steamroller, but that said, you got to understand, Fauci's a piece of garbage and belongs in jail for life or at the end of a rope. But there were a lot of people involved, and no one's talking about the core problem. Who created this disease? Where did it come from? Why was it here? Why are the vaccines so dangerous? And why can't we sue anybody over any of this? That's the real issue. By the way, I got to do a quick shameless plug. Please support us at TomRenz.com. Support the Tom Renz Show on the America Out Loud Network. Click share. This is an important conversation. We need you guys to share this. You want to stop murder protocols? You want to stop what's going on? You got to get the word out. That's why we do these interviews. Ken's book is absolutely vital. I need everybody to look at what the nurses saw. Look at this book. Get it out there, right? Share our books. There it is. There it is.
I put the link as well in our chat on both Rumble and Twitter. So please grab Ken's book.
Yeah. So please get that out there. Hit share. Tom Renz Show, TomRenz.com. We need donations. We need support. Please back us. Okay.
So if I may, I have something I want to suggest.
Please
focus on this. Is this show's about awareness, which is so important. Because most people don't know this machine exists. They don't know they or their loved ones can be thrown into it at the drop of a hat. It's still, as you pointed out, in play for COVID. It's in play for any disease. And I have a different sort of theory about these diseases. They don't even have to invent an actual disease. They can just take a common respiratory problem, put a frame around it, call it the most dangerous thing ever seen in humanity.
White lung disease.
White lung, right.
Which is pneumonia.
Which is something that every radiologist sees every day. There's nothing new about white lung. It's all baloney. And they're using the one place where the military, I believe, absolutely is involved is they're using literal warfare level propaganda against us. And you literally cannot go to war unless you have a well-oiled propaganda machine. You have to keep the people at home in line. You have to, cover your tracks internationally. And they don't leave it up to chance. And they are the world's best. And they have the world's greatest infiltration into the news media. Well, Fauci and friends, and it's not just Fauci, as you point out, it's the whole complex. They have ridden the coattails of the military propaganda machine. And there's a lot of sharing, like a guy will be trained in PSYOPs in the Army, and next thing you know, he's working for Pfizer or he's working for the CDC. Here's something, if you want to understand the size of their propaganda machine, the CDC has a 200,000 square foot building in Atlanta devoted to nothing but communications with the public. That's a big building. I once was involved in buying a 50,000 square foot building, and it was huge.
Yeah.
And that's filled with people working 24 hours a day. And our problem is it's us. It's just us. And we're trying to, make livings and, keep the lights on and everything. These guys are going, they're getting a paycheck. They're hitting the time clock. They're doing this 40 hours a week. Fauci's got 8 alone. And I don't want to single Fauci out. He's just an example. He's a cog in the machine. His department alone has 8 different guys who are directors of some aspect of his division, which is I always forget he's something under NIH, the allergy and infectious disease, right?
Yeah.
He's got 8 people whose job is just to manage public awareness.
Yeah.
And all those people have staff. So I'm just, back of the envelope. He's got 50 or 60 full-time people.
Yeah, and dedicated to lying.
And here's the other thing. We call CNN or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. They don't even pick up the phone.
No.
Fauci and friends can pick up the phone and they answer.
Yeah.
So they got all these people. So the initiatives like Tom's are so important. People always go, what can I do about it? Support the fighters. That's what you can do about it, right? Well, so awareness. We're talking about saving your life. And I want to point something out. There have been people killed by these protocols who knew the masks were BS, who knew the vaccines were BS, who knew remdesivir were BS. They got into the hospital because they felt unwell. They felt the need for hospital attention. And they got swept away by the system. If anybody listening has ever been in a hospital, it's a little bit disorienting. It's not like walking into a bar, or going into the mall.
Yeah.
You are literally captured in a sense.
Yeah.
And you know, they talk about releasing you from the hospital. Well, where else are you released from? You're released from prison, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of psychology going on. It's not necessarily deliberately foisted upon us, but it's the nature of the beast. You're in a bed, you're wearing a weird, you know, outfit. You got a little bracelet around your neck. You're not feeling well. You're very vulnerable. So even if you think you know everything about this and you're bulletproof and nobody's going to pull one over on you, we have a long list of people who were
Oh,
very
yeah.
knowledgeable who ended up dead. So
Well,
maybe sorry, go ahead, Tom.
including good doctors and nurses and lawyers. I've actually had lawyers who've been, in hospitals that, are, hey, oh my God, what can I do? Look what they're doing to me. I thought I was, I'm a lawyer. I thought I was safe. No, no, there is no safety here. And you've got to understand something. When you go to the hospital, our politicians have essentially created a situation. By the way, someone just asked, did Fauci and friends take the vaccine? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Can I tell
We
a little?
know,
Can I tell a
we
little story?
know
Go ahead. Sorry.
in France, it's been admitted, and we know elsewhere, the politicians, the leader class got placebos. They got different. The color of the cap denoted what the formulation was for a lot of these vaccines. And when you see these crooked politicians getting these, some of them are getting the real thing, some of them are not. The ones that were too stupid and went to the pharmacy, the local pharmacy, because they thought they were getting a PR thing, they may have got the real thing. But I assure you, Fauci and crew were not taking the real thing any more than Borla or any of these other guys. They weren't taking the real thing. This is absolutely a murder for hire conspiracy. So if you believe that these guys were taking the same thing you were, I got news for you. I got a bridge for you to buy. Ken,
I've been studying public injections of high-ranking officials for years, and if you go back and look at them all, cameramen know how to cut angles correctly.
Mhm.
yes,
If they want
do.
to show the needle going into the skin, they'll show
Yeah.
it. You will never see one of these guys with a full shot where you see a needle going in the skin. You'll
Mm-mm.
never see it. I
No.
saw Fauci
Well,
get injected. Yeah,
The
he didn't get
scientists, scientists like Dr. Judy McVitz, but then we also have Dr. Robert Malone. What's interesting about Malone is he says he actually got a shot, but those who've been on the ground level of this mod RNA tech for years and years and years, because it's been around forever, but it's always been horrifying to
Right.
anyone who's on the ground level researching this technology, because it's not a vaccine. They all said it's scary because as they printed themselves, we've talked about on our show back in years and years, 2015, 2006, they talked about shedding, they talked about cancer, they talked about all these ways that this tech can kill you. So anyone who knew anything about the technology, of course they're not going to touch it. You think Fauci's going to touch it? He knows how dangerous it is.
Yeah.
They talked
No.
about how dangerous it was in their own research and their own studies years before they just threw it out to the world to try out.
Yeah.
There's no question about this. This was intentional and it was planned. And someone just made a comment. So now, Reiner Folmeck from the ICIC is in prison. We all have a lot of hopes for this investigation Corona committee. Folks, let me tell you something. These are the most dangerous and evil people on the planet. They are openly putting out a product, the vaccines, that they know is killing children. They don't care because they're making money off of it. They know what's going on. They understand. So you've got to understand, we are literally fighting the definition of evil. Guys like Reiner, people like it is very, very, very treacherous to do what we do. I have had a target on my back. I cannot tell you, just on a personal level, and I don't get into this too much and I make jokes about it, but I'm going to tell you on a personal level, if people knew the kind of stuff that we have to deal with in fighting this, it would blow minds. And I'm not going to get into it because I'm not going to publicize these nonsense garbage people that do what they do. I don't care. And it ain't going to change what I'm doing. But you've got to understand, when you fight this fight, if you take this fight, no, we're not suicidal. I love life. But when you take this fight on, when you talk about the CIA developing these vaccines, when you talk about Pfizer knowing that they're murdering people, these are people this is $1 trillion industry and they don't mind killing for money. So you've got to understand who you're fighting, and you've got to understand that, even guys like Reiner's a brilliant guy. I know Reiner. They're going to get set up. They're going to get, lied about. They're going to get defamed. They're going to get this. They're going to get that. Everything that we do has to be from a defensive approach, because otherwise you're taken out of the fight. I mean, we're very careful about what we do and how we do it. And I don't care. I don't care what it, but it just, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. And you've got to know that when you're fighting this fight, this is what happens. Every single one of us. Ken will take attacks for this book. I don't know how many. I don't know what. Never know where it's coming from, but he'll get attacked. My work, daily attacks every day. Producer Andrea herself has had more attacks from her work in this health freedom stuff than any you'd ever imagine.
I knew I was in trouble when I became so dangerous. A literal homeschool patriot mom became very dangerous. So, I mean, just speaking the truth is a dangerous thing to do. Yeah.
Yep. So, I mean, it's a huge deal. Now, Ken, I want to talk to you about these nurses. This will resonate with you given the book, but so you hear something like this. Hey, so this patient comes in and they wouldn't let us test for bacterial pneumonia. They wouldn't let us do any tests. Came in with symptoms that were actually completely unrelated to COVID. But we couldn't do any tests. I actually had one guy came in for kidney issues. They test him for COVID. They throw him in the COVID wing, and once this guy gets there, they start, even though he's not having any breathing issues, they start pushing these drugs related to COVID that suppresses breathing. Next thing you know, his oxygen levels drop because you gave him drugs to suppress his breathing, and they put him on assisted breathing. Well, as they continued with these drugs and the assisted breathing, his oxygen levels continued to drop. So then they move him to the vent. They give him more drugs that continue to depress him while not treating other issues like the secondary pneumonia that's developed, because when you put someone on a vent, that's a very common issue. And they won't treat that. They're still giving him things like remdesivir. His kidneys are now getting worse because remdesivir shuts down your kidneys. This guy's dying. And then we put him on palliative care where we starve him to death, OD him on morphine and other drugs, and then we watch him die. Does this sound familiar?
This is the assembly line, and every nurse had the same narrative, and they're from different states. They're from different countries. It's an assembly line, and it all starts with you getting a positive COVID test result. And notice I didn't say you have COVID. I just say they gave you some test. And, they did little things like the tests were free to the hospitals. The government just gave them all the testing material they needed. Right. And they would test their patients over and over and over, hoping to get a positive
PCR test ran at 40 plus cycles. So it's going to show you positive no matter what you've got.
Yeah, a PCR is basically an amplification system. You take a little bit of genetic material and you amplify it rapidly. And the guy that developed it, Kary Mullis, won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for it. And I know probably most of your listeners know this, but we can never stop reminding ourselves this. He said it's not a diagnostic tool in any way. It's a laboratory production tool. It has nothing to do with diagnosing disease. You can literally find any disease in anybody if you just ramp the cycles up enough. In fact, before COVID, there was a very funny or interesting story about the New York subway, and they swabbed the New York subway. They found every disease known to man on the seats, on the handles. Now, were people dropping dead? No, because we have immune systems. And I want to talk to people about how they can protect themselves, and then in doing that, I'll also explain what they have to protect themselves from first. And I want to say this: we all have to take better care of our health. We all have to be smarter about our health. There's a lot of good YouTube channels. You can learn a whole lot, and the more you know, the less dependent you are on the system. And I think that's one of our fundamental problems. A lot of the good common sense things that we would have learned from our grandmother are now that work, by the way. That's why we're here. I mean, remember, we're alive because our ancestors who had none of this stuff survived. How did they survive? A lot of it was common sense. A lot of this material is available online. YouTube's really good. Make it a regular habit to learn how to fortify your health and to stop doing the things that might be, reducing your health. That's step number one. Step number two, realize. Somebody asked me on an interview, he said, it's so terrible to think you can't trust your doctor. And I said, what makes you think that guy's your doctor? He's the hospital's doctor. He's
Yep.
getting a paycheck from them. And
Well,
this is
that's
something
thank you, Obamacare.
yeah.
COVID
But
couldn't have happened without Obamacare, by the way.
it certainly made an already bad situation way worse. No question about it. So they're drawing their paycheck from the hospital. And I literally asked this last night on another call. We had a really interesting call with 8 nurses all at once. It was more actually. I think it was 16. We had 2 hours, 8 and 8. And I said, listen, let me ask you this. If a doctor's going to lose his job and then get blackballed, because you don't just lose a job, you also get blackballed.
Yes.
And the decision is between following orders and keeping their job and not rocking the boat and watching you die. I'm asking you, nurses, what will most doctors do? And they were like, they're going to let you die. Just keep this in mind when you're dealing with a doctor who's getting a salary from a hospital. And then on another interview, I said, these hospital corporations, and the guy stopped me and he said, wow, I've never heard anybody say that. They're always talking about hospitals. You're the first person I ever heard say hospital corporation. And I didn't intend to, it just came out. And I said, yeah, that's really right. These are not our grandparents' hospitals. Hospitals used to be community-based. The community would raise the money. Maybe some wealthy industrialist who came from the town would put the money up. It was run as a true nonprofit. Yep. Now, most of these hospitals are still operating on the legal fiction that they're nonprofits,
which is absurd. But
and so we had local doctors, local nurses, and the hospital was accountable to the community. And the purpose of the hospital, imagine this, was to help the health and well-being of people. Yeah. Well, these are corporations now, these hospital corporations, they're as ruthless as the worst pharmaceutical company, maybe even more so. They don't care.
No.
So you have
ran
to
by lawyers and businessmen, not doctors.
Yeah. And so you have to know this in your interactions with hospitals. Therefore, you don't want to go into a hospital lightly. Because here's what happens if you go in, and Tom sort of foreshadowed what I'm about to tell you now. The minute you are diagnosed as a COVID patient, which is absurd, right? They always call it a case, an active case, a patient, all this stuff. All it means is they used some half-assed test that's completely unreliable, and they got a positive result. However, your medical, and I think legal status, and this is something maybe you could shine some light on too, you are now in a new universe. All previous medical practice, all previous scientific knowledge, all previous common sense is now out the window. Yep. And you are now a COVID patient, and all kinds of things become permissible, which previously would have been unthinkable. All right. Yep. So the very first thing they do to you, if you're hospitalized and you're a COVID patient, and again, Tom makes a really important point. You could go in with a kidney problem. You could go in with a broken leg. You could go in with any one of 10,000 ailments. If you suddenly if you're tested as positive COVID, even if you don't have a sniffle, you are now in a new universe, and no normal rules apply anymore. So what are the rules for the COVID patient? This one blew my mind. Yep. And somebody asked me last night, what's the most horrible thing you saw or heard about? And I've heard about, horrible things. But the most mind-boggling thing I learned from doing the research is they banned normal anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen, also known as Advil. Yep. They banned the normal steroid treatment that they always give in cases of respiratory distress and inflammation. So, and this so we're not even talking about ivermectin, which is a completely safe drug. And by the way, we know how we know it's safe. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation sent over 1 billion doses of ivermectin to Africa over the last 10 years. Yeah. I don't know why nobody ever brought that out. He knew damn well it was a safe drug. But in any event, we're not even talking vitamin D. We're not even talking vitamin C drips. We're not talking about zinc. We're talking about the stuff that hospitals do routinely without any controversy, any made-up controversy at all.
It's over-the-counter medication. And I talked to nurses who were smuggling this stuff in to patients. One nurse was smuggling it in. They were smuggling medicine, like over-the-counter stuff like what you're saying, ibuprofen, through stuffed animals. They would rip open the stuffed animal, shove stuff in there, sew it up just to get things like ibuprofen to a patient.
Imagine how insane that is. So let's say you're a fireman, right? And you see a small fire. Well, the thing you do is you put it out right away. let's say you're a doctor and you see an inflammatory process that's
Yep.
beginning. What do? You put it out. What did
Well,
these guys do? Let it burn.
well,
Let it
let me
burn.
interrupt here because I want everybody to understand the process, right? And this is from a lawyer's perspective, right? But you don't need to be a doctor to understand this. What you do when someone is sick with a virus, because there are typically no treatments for a virus, but your body takes care of most viruses. So the way that this works is when someone goes to a hospital with some sort of a viral infection, what they will do is they will treat the symptoms and keep you functional enough that the symptoms don't kill you until your body beats the virus, right? Now, don't get, I know everybody, I'm going to get messages about there is no such thing as a virus. I don't want to hear it. Whatever you want to call it, I don't care what you call it. When you come in with something that can't be treated medicinally, what they do is they treat the symptoms until such time as your body can take care of the issue. So this is a really important thing because what happens when you don't treat the symptoms is the symptoms end up killing you. If bacterial pneumonia or some sort of a secondary infection or whatever is what is causing you the problem, if we don't treat that, you die, right? So what they're doing is they're intentionally not treating the symptoms, which means your body can't, your body's getting hit from so many directions that it can't actually recover and heal itself. This is common. This is like medicine 101. Even a lawyer understands it. So this is an intentional play to kill people. There's no question about that. So with that, they're literally doing everything wrong.
Right.
When you go in to treat someone for COVID, everything that modern medicine normally does to treat you for any other illness, they threw out the window and they said, you know what? We're not doing any of it. You're going to die. It's COVID. And we're going to make extra money when you die because we get extra money when you get on remdesivir. You get extra money when you go on the vent and we get extra money when you die. And because our politicians who are not talking about their role in this passed legislation that gave you extra money when you died from something, COVID, we had hospitals who are nothing more than money grubbing monsters out there saying, well, hey, there's more money when you die. Let's kill them. Right. And there's immunity. We gave them immunity from lawsuits and more money when they kill you. Think about that. Our legislation, I testified in, I think, 2021 in front of Pennsylvania legislature about this. We have legislated a situation where hospitals were given more money for murdering people and they were given immunity in the courts from having done so. This is the most insane and stupid thing I've ever heard. Our legislation, our politicians specifically passed laws to incentivize murder and protect people from the consequences. It is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, unless it's intentional, which it absolutely was and is inexcusable. By the way, support us at TomRenz.com. Share the Tom Renz Show, the America Out Loud Network. We need your help. Hit share on this. This show is so important because this is still happening. You got to get Ken's book, What the Nurses Saw. We got to get this out there. We got to see it. Get it out there. Share this stuff. TomRenz.com. Go to the Tom Renz Show, America Out Loud Network. We're all over the place. Help us. Share. We need people to look at what's going on here. All right. So
the other thing, Tom, they did is they banned families and advocates and anybody from coming in and seeing what was going on. So all this stuff was happening in a black box. That was also completely unprecedented in the history of medicine. And interestingly enough, the nurses who saw horror after horror after horror, they said the worst thing was denying people advocates to see what was going on.
Yeah. Well, there's no question. I mean, people were begging me. Yeah. Why can't I just say goodbye? They said they're going to die. They're going to die in 2 days. Why can't his son come in and say goodbye to his daddy? Why can't the daughter come in and say goodbye to her daddy or her mommy? Mm-hmm. Why can't they? I mean, honestly, that's the most horrific thing I've ever seen. Prisoners get better treatment than this.
Exactly. When I interviewed Nicole Saratek, she broke down in tears while we were talking. And she told me of a story that she actually, you know, didn't get in trouble, didn't get caught, but she told the story how she got one of her patients who was going to die. She smuggled him out of the hospital through a back door, and he had a emotional goodbye with his family next to the dumpsters in the back of the hospital in New York. So she had to smuggle her dying patient out of the hospital, and by the dumpsters behind the hospital, he said goodbye to his family. That's how inhumane and disgusting this whole thing has been.
Yep. I wish there was video of that. I would love to put that out there so that people could see this is our medical system. This is what our politicians have done. And make no mistake, I want you guys to understand when people say, what are you doing about it, Renz? Lawfare, right? Legal political PR. We cannot litigate this away. And I want to be clear. We've got a lot of good lawyers that are litigating on this, and we're all working on it. We're all working hard on it. But we have legislation that's been passed specifically to allow this to happen. We have to have our politicians change the laws. The courts can't change this. The courts do not have the legal ability under our Constitution to just change the law. So we have to, if we want to win this, we've got to make sure that enough people hear this message and understand what's happening, that they force these crooked politicians who are owned by Big Pharma to actually change these laws. If they don't, this isn't going to change. So they said, when people say to me, Renz, you know, you're doing an interview with Ken, and Ken's, it's very compelling. You know, you and producer Andrea are bringing out great information. Why are you doing that instead of suing somebody? The law's clear. You have immunity for actions that you took with COVID. There is not a damn thing I can do in a court about that. The courts are going to say, listen, our legislature, our crooked politicians have passed a law. The Constitution says that they can pass that law. And the reality is that you cannot ask a court to change the law. These laws have to be changed from our crooked politicians that are owned by Big Pharma. It's not just that. So what I'm pushing for is, you know, as an attorney, you understand the law from beginning to end. It's not just what I can do in a court. It's also what I can do to push and promote legislation that will fix this at the state or federal level. So we do a lot of that, but that only works when we, the people, stand together and help. You've got to be calling. You've got to be fighting. You've got to get people together. We have to have millions and millions of people stand and say, because understand something. Brad Wenstrup, who was appointed to the head of the COVID committee precisely because he was owned by Big Pharma, his job is to whitewash us. They're not going to ask real questions. They're going to throw Fauci under the bus, and Fauci belongs under the bus, but they're not going to do anything about it. What are they doing to change this legislation? When's Brad going to have me come down and testify about the legislation that exists that allows for these hospital murders to occur without any sort of ability to do anything about it as an attorney? When is Brad going to have me come down and talk about the vaccine injuries? When is Brad going to have me? By the way, Brad Wenstrup's a fellow Ohioan. I live in Ohio. He's out of Cincinnati where he's controlled by Big Pharma. But understand something. I'm not hard to get a hold of. But, you know, the first time I was able to go to Congress and do anything with this was through Ron Johnson. And, you know, then I went back with Marjorie Taylor Greene. These guys, you know, are actually looking for truth. But you've got these frauds like Brad Wenstrup who are up there acting like they're doing something. And this huge, huge push and focus on Anthony Fauci is a disservice to all of the people who've been murdered. Anthony Fauci should very quickly be thrown in jail for the rest of his life. And then we need to start going for the real people who are still doing this. We have to push the legislation. And none of these politicians want to take accountability for what they've done. They have passed legislation that is allowing for murder. We have legalized murder in the hospitals, and we've made the hospitals immune from retribution from the attorneys. Until that's changed, there's not a damn thing we can do about this other than watch our loved ones be murdered every time they come in. So you want to know why Renz spends so much damn time on the media? It's because until we, the people, start demanding this change, it ain't going to happen. We've got to get this word out there everywhere. Why did I say share? Because guess what? We haven't had enough people talking about this. We don't have enough people aware of what Ken is talking about, of what the nurses saw. of what the doctors saw, of what I saw firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
Until people wake up and understand what's occurred, this will continue. So I'm praying to God that people share this and get Ken's book out, and that we start calling Jim Jordan and Brad Winstrup and all these other politicians and asking, what are you going to do about the legislation that keeps Big Pharma and the hospital safe when they murder my loved ones? Guess what? Disease X is coming.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be released. And when that does, it's going to be COVID on steroids, folks. You better be ready. This has to be an election issue. We need to ask everybody what you're going to do about that. So anyways, I'm sorry I get on a tirade, but it's
this is you're saving me from saying it, because this is the issue. This machine is still in place, and it's not going anywhere. They can stick the key in, turn the ignition on, and fire it up again and kill another hundreds of thousands of people. And we should really talk about the scale of the killing, right? So 1.1 million people in the United States were said to have died of COVID. I'm being very particular with my language. Of those, 92% of them were in a hospital or other medical facility. Now, does that mean 900,000 plus of them were killed by the hospital? I don't know. Nobody knows the real number until somebody looks at the facts. But we know they put a protocol in place that was guaranteed to kill. And we've already talked about the fact that they didn't do normal anti-inflammatory treatments. They let the fire burn. Another trick they would use is somebody would be on what's called a cannula. They needed some assistance with breathing, and they had enough, but maybe the oxygen level wasn't perfect. So they said, this cannula is not working. We're going to put you on a BiPAP. Okay, this is really important for people to know. You don't want to go on a BiPAP early.
This is escalation. This is how they escalated it to the vent.
Yeah, and a BiPAP is basically a vent without the tube down your throat. It's a very intense thing. It's a mask on your face. It's been described to me as you put your head out the window at 60 miles an hour and it's just blowing in. Now, under normal circumstances, if the doctor needs to escalate to that level, and it's not a common thing, but if they do, you're supposed to be educated. You're supposed to be told, listen, this is going to be very uncomfortable, because they strap it on. I mean, it's on. You can't take it off. I mean, and you're already coming in distressed. You're already coming in with respiratory problems. So now you got this mask on you, shoving air down. A compassionate, intelligent doctor who wanted you to live would say, listen, this is intense. It's going to be uncomfortable. But they didn't do this for a lot of these patients. They just slapped this thing on, often unnecessarily, and left them alone. So what do you think happens?
Let me interrupt you because we're going to have to sign off for the radio show. We're going to do a few extra minutes on the live here, if you're able to. But support us on TomRenz.com. Support the Tom Renz Show, the America Out Loud Network. Please hit share on this. This is so important. Check out the Rumble, the Twitter channel. Watch us. Look for this show everywhere. This needs to be everywhere. TomRenz.com. What the Nurses Saw. Please share that book. Get it out there. Thank you guys for listening. Now we're going to do a few extra minutes here on the live, because I think I don't want to cut you off on this, and I think it's too important. So please go ahead and continue, Ken.
Well, I always say, if you're going to commit a crime, commit a really complicated crime with a lot of moving pieces, and it's very hard to do. So there's a lot to unfold here, but be careful if they're putting your loved one or you on a BiPAP. Because it means the next step is to put you on a vent. Now, just so everybody knows what a vent is, and intubation is, it's a pipe that's stuck down your throat, all the way down your throat. The slang for it in hospitals is the garden hose.
Yep.
It is considered a really intrusive kind of operation. It's an operation in a sense,
with a lot of issues that go with it.
So many. I mean, first of all, they have to drug you. They have to knock you out. They have to give you analgesics to deal with the pain, including fentanyl, very often. They have to give you they have to give you paralytics so you don't move around. And this isn't a pill that you take. This is an IV, and there's a bag. And there could be anywhere from 5 to 12 bags going into these patients to keep them under. Now, under normal circumstances, you don't intubate somebody unless it's the end of the road. It's the last ditch chance. You've exhausted all other opportunities, because if you put somebody on an vent, there's a good chance you're going to kill them just on the vent. Now add all the drugs and all the drug interactions, and so the hospitals were financially incentivized to put people on vents. So they were racing people through the vents. One of the interviews I have is with a 23-year veteran veterinary, forgetting the word, therapist, respiratory, excuse me, respiratory therapist, 23 years of experience, stellar record, respected by all. And he goes into the details of how the way they used intubation under COVID, unprecedented in the history of medicine. And then they did another incentivization that I learned through you probably already know this. The hospitals got an extra bonus if they kept you vented for 96 hours or more. Now, my expert in the book said, listen, once we vent somebody, the very next day, we're doing some tests to see if we can get them off it. Why? Because of the drugs they're having to have to stay under, because of the chance of infection, because the vent itself could destroy their lung tissue. I mean, this is not a risk-free procedure. It's highly risky, right? So you want to get somebody off fast. So what did the government do? Hey, just keep them on for 96 hours and we'll give you another bonus.
And they were worried that we didn't have enough vents. Do you remember?
Oh, well,
I mean, remember in the beginning of this where it was like they were building all these extra tent hospitals for this pandemic where, most of the boats.
And who was the cheerleader for vents? The corrupt Andrew Cuomo, who had to leave the governor's office in New York in disgrace. By the way, I watch a lot of news, and I heard Chris Cuomo say, we were talking with Tony every day.
Yep.
Anthony Fauci was on the phone every day with Andrew Cuomo with his bomber jacket, pretending to be a leader, doing his daily. He also said no resuscitation.
Yeah. Well, remember, Fauci's job was to coordinate the murder, but he was just part of a machine. He was just the face of it.
Exactly. All these guys were just underlings. Yeah. But it's important.
I want to stop 1 second because I want to interject this, and I don't think it can be overstated. So, I don't think that I've even talked about this as much as I should have. You mentioned the BiPAP machine, and I want to talk about that because what they did is when they went through this escalation process, the cannules, the BiPAP was an important part of this. And for those of you guys that don't know, like Ken was saying, it's a mask they put on your face and it blows air down your throat. Now, this is what they did was they would turn this up to uncomfortable levels. It caused people pain. I had a lot of people say that this was hurting me. It's causing me pain. And what they would do is they would crank this up so high that it would cause lung damage. It would cause inflammation. When they blow it too hard, it can actually cause inflammation in your lungs that leads to pneumonia-like symptoms, which they then use to justify going to the vent. Right. So this whole thing, they knew this. This whole thing was an intentional thing. I mean, I can go through. I've pulled the rest of the documents. Right. So I went through the FDA documents, and where they talk about the dangers of BiPAP, when they talk about respiratory therapy, I have the whole paper trail on this. Right. Yeah. So this isn't like it might have happened. This was a well-known thing. Our FDA, specifically with Fauci and all these guys, they specifically structured this in a way that was going to result in the murder of patients. They knew they were doing everything wrong, and they did it anyways. Your loved ones were murdered. They didn't die by accident from COVID. They were murdered. The FDA knew it. The CDC knew it. The hospitals knew it. They didn't care because they were getting paid for it, because our politicians passed legislation that paid them for murder. They paid them for all of these things. Get your bonus, murder your patient.
They got more money if you die. More money if you die.
I mean, just think of the planning involved. Think of how involved it is to draft legislation and to push it through. So at some point, there were a bunch of people in a room with a whiteboard figuring out, okay, let's come up with a protocol. Yep. And they deliberately came up with a protocol that flew in the face of all previous medical experience, all scientific reason, and all common sense.
Yeah, this wasn't something that could have happened by accident. They literally went the wrong direction in every imaginable instance.
And then they got
every single time
Mm-hmm.
that they had the opportunity to give someone, something that would intervene and help, a proper medical intervention. They went the other direction. This is not an accident. And Joyce just asked who wrote the bill. There's a bunch of bills, the CARES Act, the PrEP Act, a bunch of these things. But then you have to look at the protocols that were structured, that came from the CDC, NIH, FDA, And these protocols were then distributed, and I'm going to tell you guys, it's very difficult to understand how this is done and to trace this, because it was done in a way where it's done in conjunction with the big hospital systems and the insurance companies, and all of them have NDAs with each other. So you can't see what they were doing, but what they were, in many cases, but what they did, this is why Obamacare was key. And, for anybody that doesn't know why it is that Trump, when he came into office in 2016 and had a Republican House and a Republican Senate, you may remember he wanted to repeal Obamacare, and he couldn't do it, even though he controlled both houses. And, he wanted to repeal it. Why is that? Well, because McConnell and these crooks were absolutely in on this. This has been going on. We've laid out in other shows how this was going on since the mid-2010s. This has been planned. This was planned under Obama, which is why Obamacare was there. This whole thing has been done over the course of decades, not years. Right. And you've got to understand that this was one of the most well-orchestrated plans in history. Someone asked me about Nuremberg 2.0. Understand, Nuremberg 2.0 requires legislation. The only way that happens is if enough, this is again why we're doing this show, why we're talking to people, until enough people demand it. I mean, demand it. It will not happen. It will not happen. You should look up the CARES Act. You should look up the PrEP Act.
We have it, by the way, we have a whole section on all the financial incentives in the CARES Act in the book.
Perfect.
We have an interview with someone who's done a deep dive, and you may know her, AJ DePriest. And we also have a brilliant paper that she wrote, all the financial incentives, all spelled out. Yep. She did a really good job on that.
And then emergency, look in your own state as to what type of legislation poured in with the emergency, under the guise of the, emergency. So, like in my state, I can track fraud in elections, fraud in the fraud, with what they did in our schools and the way they locked us down. So much of it happened because under the emergency use or emergency thing that they tried to pretend it was, our governors became dictators. They could do whatever they wanted.
Yes, they did.
Medical dictators.
Medical dictators.
It's quite amazing.
Well, and I hate doing this, but we're going to have to end this. And, Ken, maybe if you want to, we could have you come back and do another. There's a lot more to talk about on this.
I love it because you guys are so informed on this topic. You're already there, and we're just filling in the blanks. But yeah, it's big. It's big.
Oh,
but the main thing is be careful when you're in these hospitals. Make sure you have an advocate. Don't let them race into any procedures.
No,
Amen.
No. Well, and I'm going to be. Don't sign the paperwork that says that they can treat you however they want when no one's there.
Yeah.
There's paperwork in pretty much every hospital that does that across the country. It says that if you're medically incapacitated, the hospital gets to make the decisions for you. Do not sign that paperwork. You've got to watch what you're signing. There's some real dangerous paperwork when you go to the hospital at this point. They'll give you the COVID vaccine. They'll give you this. They'll give you that. They'll make all sorts of decisions about your treatment without your consent, and you're without any sort of recourse at that point. So, Ken, thank you so much. Make sure, I want to urge everybody, make sure you get the book, What the Nurses Saw. This is a really important book. It needs to be out there. We need people to see what's going on there. We need to share this show. We need it everywhere. Support us at TomRenz.com. Tom Renz Show on the America Out Loud Network. Support us everywhere. Our Rumble channel, our YouTube, we're not on YouTube. We got banned from there, but our Rumble channel, our Twitter channel. Support us, share this, help us get the word out, folks. You want to save your loved ones. You want to fight it back. Everybody says, well, what can we do? Well, that's it. That's it. Until enough of we, the people, are aware of what's going on and demand changes, it's going to continue. So, well, feel free. This will be posted on X. So if you guys want to continue talking in the comments, go to my X page, Renz Tom, at Renz Tom, and chat away. I hope you guys will use that to connect. I want activists to use that to connect. We post this stuff. Best way to connect with each other is there. It's an easy way to do it. You can find out who's like-minded, who's working on this. So just, comment there. You can also, you can support us. We're on Truth Social. We're all over the place. And if you want to get us for anything else, if you want to get us for interviews or anything else, media@tomrenz.com. All right. Thank you all. Thanks, Ken, a lot. I appreciate it. We definitely got to get you back on, and thank everybody for listening.
Thank you.